Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We'll go ahead and get started here. All right, looks like we got a couple in there. All right, so we'll start here with starting with Rick F. So Rick F says my ball flight is real high, and I'm not taking divots. Striking sounds good and looks good with a slight draw. So if you're not taking divots and you're hitting it high, it's most likely because you're kind of releasing the club early. So let me kind of show you here. So if I hit it, basically there's two ways to hit it high. And you can also do a combination of these things, but there's two things that largely influences how high the ball goes. One is the loft that you're presenting to the ball, right? So if I'm coming in and I'm early releasing the club, right, I'm going to present more loft, whereas if I have my hands more in front, I'm going to be de-lofting, right? I'm going to be compressing the ball more. So I'm going to hit it higher if I have more loft, right? Just like, if I want to hit a flop shot, I'm going to lay open the face so that way I have as much loft on the club as I can so I can hit it as high as I can, right? So that's one thing. And then the other thing is speed. If I hit the ball with a lot of speed, I'm going to give it more energy, so it's going to keep climbing up in the air. So those are the kind of the two main things that make the ball go high. Now, you're saying you hit the ball high, and you're saying you're not taking divots. That leads me to believe, based on the evidence, that you're most likely releasing the club early, because when you tend to release the club early, your club's going to tend to bottom out where the ball is, right? So when we don't take divots, what's happening is the club is bottoming out either at or slightly before the ball usually. And that's going to lead to thin shots, right? Or the club's just not getting to the ground, but usually it's because the club's bottoming out at the ball. So if I early release the club, I'm going to add more loft. And if I early release the club, I'm going to tend to have the club bottom out where the ball is. That's going to lead to thin shots, right? So working on getting the hands more in front and working on really just getting the hands more in front of impact, getting the club to release more out in front. That will help you to compress it more, to not hit it so high. And it will also help you to make better ground contact. So that'd be like work. It's hard for me to know exactly what the reasons are, but what I can tell you is we have the top speed golf system, which leads you to being able to release the club out in front. So that's what I would recommend working on, is working on the top speed golf system to get you there. And, probably the 20-minute shallowing fix as well, because that's a big reason why a lot of people, tend to release the club early. A lot of times it's because the club's coming down steep or the face is open or both. So either one of those will help you on your way to get that to be better. All right, let's get going. So Dan A says, hey, Q, I'm having trouble with chipping. What should be my motion when doing the backswing and the through swing? I feel awkward and yippy when chipping, and I'm having difficulty controlling club head speed. The pendulum swing video under the chipping mastery isn't quite doing it for me. Any tips on how I should rotate and what part of the body should control my rotation? What should the arms and wrists be doing? Chipping feels really awkward to me. It seems too easy for Clay in the video, so I just end up putting really hard when on the green side rough. Sorry, I'm asking you to explain chipping in detail, but I would just like to know what feels I should have when chipping. Thanks, QPS. Should the arms be bent at setup just like a putter? So let's talk about chipping a little bit. So first of all, one thing that may be going on is you may be basically putting a stranglehold on the club, right? So that's kind of the first thing that I would look at. If you're getting yippy and you don't have any feel of the club head and nothing's really working, typically what I see is people are just holding onto the club too tightly, So really I want you to kind of loosen up the grip, really have soft hands, have supple hands, and really feel the weight of the club head, right? Feel the weight of the club head swinging back and forth. That's what you want, right? So let the momentum of the club head kind of go, right? Let the weight of the club head kind of drop onto the ball. That's what I want you to feel like. Now, as far as kind of what's powering the rotation, most of it's going to come, basically from your chest area, right? So the lower body is going to remain pretty quiet, right? It's going to move around a little bit, but it's not like the full swing where I'm really getting my legs involved. The legs are going to stay, the lower body is going to stay fairly quiet. And it's going to be mostly kind of my chest just kind of turning. But you can see my legs move a little bit, but it's not much. So feet close together. I like about a club head width or so apart. Ball roughly about the middle of the stance. The arms can have a little bit of bend in them. Really, we're just letting them hang straight down, really is what we're doing. We're just letting them hang. If I let my arms just hang, I have a little bit of bend in my arm, right? So that'd be straightened out, right? I need to add tension to my arms to straighten out my arms. But if I relax my arm, right, it's going to have a little bit of bend to it. So that's really what I want you to do is I just want you to relax your arm, right? We're going to have the shaft pretty close to straight up and down, maybe just a little bit of lean, right? And I just want you to feel the weight of the club head, right? Feel the weight of the club head and just brush the turf. You can see I'm really just I'm staying very central, right? I'm not shifting anything this way or shifting that way. I'm just staying very centered and I'm just coming through and I'm just letting that club head drop onto the ground. That's it. So I feel really loose with the hands and you'll likely feel a lot better with what you're doing. All right, let's keep going. So BJ says, Q, what are your thoughts on the DST compressor training aid in someone who has trouble flipping, has an early release? Yeah, so the DST, I don't have a ton of experience with it, but I have swung with it a little bit. I think what it's best for is getting your getting the club on plane, right? Because basically, if you're not familiar with what the DST compressor is, it's basically a curved shaft club, right? So basically, the shaft kind of goes. So this would be obviously a straight shaft club. The DST compressor, the club head would be like right here, right? So if I have the face. If I'm coming down over the top, if I'm coming in too shallow, if I have the face wide open or closed, you won't be able to hit the DST compressor. You just won't hit it. You won't hit it. So I don't know that it actually helps you to get more shaft lean, to be honest. But what I do think that it does is I think it helps you to be able to. You have to have that. I take that back. It can help you to get more shaft lean because basically what it comes down to is. If you can hit the club, right? If you can hit it solidly, then it's going to help you to hit your shot because you have very little margin for error with the DST compressor, right? So if you can get to where you can hit the DST compressor, you can hit a normal shaft club becomes very easy, right? But it's not going to automatically make you start hitting the ball well, right? You still have to learn what it takes to get the club shallowing out. So it's not like a miracle training aid. I do think it's helpful. John Rahm uses it in his warm up, like every time he warms up. But it's it's to help you kind of get things because you can be a little bit off. You can be a little bit off with a normal shaft club and still hit it fine, right? But if you're a little bit off with a DST compressor, you will not hit it fine. So it helps you to kind of fine tune things where you need to be. So basically, if you can learn to hit the DST compressor, then you can learn to hit, normal shots become easy. But it's not something that's going to make you like you're not going to pick up the DST compressor and really, really struggle with it, right, to be able to hit it, and then it's going to make you better with your iron. That's not really how it works. Like you basically got to figure out how to hit the DST compressor, right? And if you're coming down steep over the top, flip, it's not going to make you just suddenly stop flipping your hands, right? You have to basically get to where you stop flipping your hands to be able to hit it, right? Because if you flip your hands, that club's it's not going to work. So, I do like it. It's just that it's not going to be like a miracle worker kind of thing. You really have to kind of work through it, to be able to get, to work correctly. Jan K says, I realize since the driver and setup is different for the irons, but should I feel the same when trying to shallow out both clubs? So feel is relative, so it's hard for me to know what you need to feel exactly. But you do need to shallow out the driver more than you do with the irons because of the ball position, right? So if I use my hula hoop here, right? So if I have my hula hoop, if my ball position for an iron, let's say just for simplicity, that it's in the middle of my stance, right? So if I'm shallowing out the club this much, my club is working out to the ball, right? It's shallowed out, it's working out to the ball, and it's turning the corner at the ball, right? Well, now let's imagine I'm hitting a driver and my ball position's up here by my left hand. Let's say I shallow it out the same amount, right? Well, my club's going to come down, it's going to turn the corner, then it's going to work to the left at the ball, right? And you can do that. You can have an out to in path with your driver. You're just going to hit pulls and you're going to hit fades. If that's what you want to hit, then that's fine. But you're going to have your result of your shot's going to be different, right? You can be hitting a draw with your irons and a fade with your driver. Now, if that's something that you want to do, you can have a very similar feeling with both. But if you want to hit draws with both, you're going to need to shallow out the club more with the driver, right, to get the path to be working from the inside in order to, when the ball positions more forward, right? So it really just depends on what you're going for, with your ball flight. It's going to be a similar feel if you want to draw irons, fade driver. It's going to be a different feel if you want to draw both, most likely. But what you feel and what's the reality, can be two different things. You may feel like you're shallowing it out, more with the driver, but you may be shallowing it out the same, right? So it's hard to know with the feel stuff. So Gene H says, this may fall in the category as you describe feel versus real. I enjoy the videos from TSG and view as quickly as they hit my email box. But it looks as though all videos, including those by Clay, when discussing the drills to increase shallowing by getting club way underneath the takeaway plane. When they swing on this drill, the drop below plane is almost imperceptible. Obviously, all of you shallow and shaft forward the irons, but the drills don't obviously show much comments. Yeah, so not every player is going to have a really pronounced like shallowing move, right? Not every player is going to have that going on, right? In fact, there's some players that, just to make it even more confusing, there's some players that have the club really laid off and then they actually steepen the club in the downswing, but it's still in a shallow position. So what I would say for shallowing, what shallowing is just having the club behind the hands in the downswing. It doesn't really have anything to do with the backswing. Now, the backswing can influence how much you shallow out the club, but you can bring it back on any way and still get the club working shallow in the downswing. So it's really about where the club is in the downswing. So shallowing just means I have the club kind of behind my hands, right? That's really what shallowing is, and then it kicks out to the ball, right? That's all that shallowing is. So this would be steep, this would be shallow, right? So I have the club head behind my hand stump. A good way to kind of look at this, and if you want to look at your swing and look at plenty of tour player swings, is to use some sort of swing analysis app or software. The one that we use at Tosby Golf is OnForm. It's the one that I would highly recommend. It's an awesome app. If you sign up for the online lessons, basically you get free access to the app as one of our clients for the online lessons. But outside of that, they do have a monthly. It's like $5 a month. You'll get a free trial. I think you can still use it for free, but you have a very limited amount of videos. So if you want to have, I don't think it's unlimited, but if you can have basically be able to take all the videos your heart desires for the most part, you would want to pay the $4.99 a month or whatever it is. But basically what you do is you would set up the camera down the toe line. This is very, very crucial to get it set up down the toe line. If it's not down the toe line, it's not going to give you the correct information, right? So we want to make sure we're down the toe line. We want to make sure that we're about hip level. We want to make sure that the camera is far away enough to where you and the club stay in the frame. This camera angle here is actually too high and it's too close, right? When I go up to the top, it goes out of frame. So if it goes a little bit out of frame, that's fine. But ideally, you and the club would stay in the frame throughout the entire swing. Now, what we would want to see is we'd want to do here is draw a line from the hosel of the club up through the elbow. This is what we refer to as the elbow plane line. And basically, it's a really, really good reference for if you're shallowing out the club or not, right? So there's some players that basically take it right up that plane line and they bring it right down pretty much on that plane line. There's no distinct look of shallowing, right? There's no distinct look of, whoa, he's really shallowing out the club. But he's still shallowing out the club because that's what it's just bringing the club down behind your hand slightly. That's all it is, right? So Adam Scott would be a good example, right? If you look at Adam Scott, if you look at Tiger, right? If you look at a lot of those players, there's no pronounced shallowing move, right? If you look at a player like Matt Wolff, super obvious shallowing move because his club is way out here, right? But if you already have the club in a pretty shallow position at the top and all you're doing is just lowering your arms, right? So what we want to understand is that lowering the arms also shallows out the club. So if I'm like this, that shallows out the club. Now the club hasn't done this, right? I think this is what everyone equates shallowing with. This definitely is shallowing, right? But this is also shallowing, right? Where the club lowers, right? So if you look at Tiger, he goes up to the top. It's like this, right? And the arms lower, right? Well, there's no pronounced shallowing move, but the club is still shallowing because he's basically keeping it. The pitch of the shaft is staying the same, but he's lowering his arm. So that club's shallowing. You can see when he gets here, that club's behind his hands, and then he throws it out to the ball. So there's players that may be super laid off, right? An example of this would be used to be Ricky Fowler. Ricky Fowler is not doing this in his most recent swings that I've seen. But Ricky Fowler used to be like this at the top of the swing, and then he would go like that in the downswing. But when he would get here, the club is still shallow. So he's actually steepening the club, but it's still shallow. We don't need to do a crazy, shallowing move. It doesn't take a lot to shallow out the club. So let's just talk about that. What exactly shallows out the club? So shallowing out the club comes from several things. What we want to do is we want to shallow out the club with the upper body and steepen the club with the lower body. So what that means is what a lot of people do is they actually shallow out the club with the lower body, meaning they stand up, right? So if I have the club like this, right, and then I stand up, I early extend, look what happens to the club. Now it shallows out. It moves to a flatter position, right? That's how a lot of people tend to shallow out the club. What we want to do is we actually want to stay in our posture. So if I'm like this, that steepens. And if I rotate, that steepens. And I want to neutralize that with shallowing moves from my upper body. So it starts in the wrists, right? If I flex my lead wrist, extend back my trail wrist, right? If I do that, that shallows out the club. Forearms, right? If my forearms rotate, you can think of that as like turning a doorknob, right? So if I pin my elbows to my side and then rotate my forearms, that shallows out the club. My shoulder joints can shallow out the club. So you can think of that as like pointing my elbows. Clay talks about this in the 20-minute shallowing fix, kind of the chopping motion, pointing the elbows in the direction that you want to swing, right? So that's this. So that's losing the arm wrestling contest with my trail arm and winning the arm wrestling contest with my lead arm. That shallows out the club. My spine shallows out the club, right? If I keep my hips level, right, and then I tilt my spine, right? This is coming from my middle of my spine here, my thoracic spine area. That shallows out the club, right? Lowering my arms, that shallows out the club. So if I do all of these things, I do my wrists, I turn my wrists, I get my elbows in, I get the spine angle, right? And I lower my arms. Well, look at where that club is so shallow. It's crazy, right? You don't need to do all of them, but you need to have your own recipe of those things that gets the club shallow, right? So everybody's going to be a little bit different, but those are the things that that shallow out the club, or get the club to be in a position where it's shallow in the downswing. If the club is already pretty much in a position where it doesn't need to move into a shallower position, there's not going to be a pronounced shallowing move, because it's all, you're just keeping it there, right? But that doesn't mean that if I already have the club in a position like this at the top, that I can't steepen it, right? I can certainly go like that. I can reverse, I can do the opposite of all the moves that I just talked about. I can cup my wrists, I can rotate my forearms, I can pull my elbows down that way, and I can certainly shallow up the club. You just have to continue with whatever moves you want to do to keep that club in a shallow position. All right, let's keep going. So Andrew K says, I'm finding that I can easily shallow out the club with my mid irons than with I can more easily shallow the club with my mid irons than my driver. I'm seeing it in the numbers on the launch monitor and the ball flight. Does that make sense? Do I need to think differently about shallowing when working with the driver? Yeah, so you may have missed that earlier, but yes, you actually need to shallow out the driver more than the irons. There's also another thing that makes it more difficult to shallow out the driver, and this is something that I see quite often. Because the ball position is more forward, what I see a lot of people do is they kind of open up their chest and their shoulders, and a lot of times their hips even, to the ball, right? So with an iron, right, it's much easier to have everything nice and squared up, right? So my shoulders, my hips, everything's not, my knees are all squared up because the ball position's here, right? But when you move the ball position there, look what happens to my hips and my shoulders. My hips and my shoulders, now they get all open, and a lot of times that can lead to a steepening of the club, right? So we need to make sure that we keep everything nice and square with the driver, with the ball position more forward. John Rahm actually has a little trick that he does. He tends to fade most of his drives, but he will hit a draw when he needs to. Part of what helped him win the Masters was he had to hit a draw on a few holes, and he did. He pulled it off nicely. So what John does, and you may have noticed, and there's definitely been some people talking about it, is that when he's hitting a draw, he actually sets up with the driver more behind the ball. He sets it up with 6 inches behind the ball. To him, that makes it easier for him to get his body alignments in a good place, to make it easier for him to swing from the inside. When he sets up to the ball, that makes it easier for him to set up for a fade. So maybe something you can try if you're struggling to draw or get the driver shallowing out. All right, let's keep going. So Ron R says, hi, I realized a few days ago that I'm cross-eye dominant. I am right-handed, but my left eye is dominant. Do you recommend any setup alignment changes? No, actually, it's probably easier for you if you're left eye dominant, because you can turn your head more and be able to see the ball at the top of the swing. So there's not really anything you need to do different. It just actually makes things, that's probably more of an advantage than a disadvantage. Because when you go up, if you're right-handed and you're right eye dominant, when you go up to the top, if your head turns, right, your right eye is not seeing the ball, right? And that can make things more difficult. But your left eye is seeing the ball. So it probably can encourage you to make a bigger turn if you're left eye dominant. So I would look at it as an advantage, not a disadvantage. All right, let's keep going. So Stan S says, I need help with the fluid angle spine. I know it's an important fundamental. I can't seem to follow the spine angle after the initial setup with a little bump to the left. And the buckle is slightly left on the center and the head slightly right of center. This is where I get lost, as my left shoulder and chest go down and back. How do I know if at the top the spine angle is the same as that address? Hope I'm making it clear. Might have to leave your office hours before I see your reply. Thanks for your help. So yeah, you look on video, or you look at yourself in a mirror. That's what I'd recommend doing. That's how you would know. So yeah, use video, use an app like OnForm. You can just use your video on your phone as well. But but that's what I'd recommend. And really what you're looking at is the overall angle of your body, right? So I address, right? If I take this club and I take it from my chin down to my belt buckle here, I get my posture and I tilt until that touches the inside of my leg. That's where I would like to be, right? And then when I go up to the top of the swing, right, I'm just going to retain that angle, right? Now, if people are losing that angle, it's typically because their hips are sliding that way, away from the target, or because their head is moving that way. Now, sometimes the head also moves this way, so this would be too much, right? Which means that we're not tilting our shoulders, right? So what gets you to what's happening when you go up to the top of the swing is you're side bending, right? So if you imagine my shoulders or my hips are level, excuse me, in my spine, I'm doing this, right? Tilting, right? So if I tilt, that's one thing that happens. I'm also going to extend slightly, right? And then I'm going to turn, right? So if I put those together, if I get my posture here and I tilt and then I extend a little bit and then I turn, there's the top of the swing, right? So if you look at it from this angle, if I'm in my posture here, right? And then I'm going to tilt that way. I'm going to extend a little bit and then I'm going to turn. There's the top of the swing. So if I don't tilt, right? If I'm just here and then I extend a little bit and then I turn and I don't tilt, here's the top of my swing, right? So if I show you that from this angle, extend a little bit, turn, no tilt, right? So if I have the tilt, then I'm in better position. Now, if I don't turn, right, then it's just this, right? If I don't extend at all, right? So if I'm here and I don't do a little bit of that, just a little bit of extend, right? Then I'm going to be more like that. I need to have a little bit of extend to keep my head from moving off the ball so much. So if you're moving way off the ball, it's usually because maybe your hips are sliding, right? So if my hips slide, then I'm going to lose my spine angle. A good drill for that is something called the chair drill. And if you struggle with chunks and thins, odds are you probably need this drill. I prescribe this drill quite a bit to students because it's a very common thing that I see. Basically, what I would like to see, if we draw a line on the outside of your trail hip, I would like to see, to start the swing, I'd like to see a little bit of a movement off the ball into that line slightly to start. I'm talking like an inch. So you're just bumping into that line. And then from that's just to move pressure into your trail foot. And then as soon as you start feeling that pressure, you're pushing that hip back and around. You're actually going to create a little bit of a gap between your hip and that line, right? What I see oftentimes especially with players who struggle with turning, keeping their spine angles, players that struggle with chunks and thins, all these kinds of things, is they go up to the top of the swing. It's like this, right? Where the leg is almost straight up and down at the top. The hip has moved into that line. Your momentum. So there's several things going on here. So one, your momentum is going away from the target as you go up to the top. That's going to make it very, very difficult to get to your lead side. Two, you're going to tend to be putting your spine in a position that's going to make you come over the top, typically, right? And three, you're not going to be turning very much, right? If I slide, I don't turn as much. If I shift and then I push my hip back around, now I'm going to turn much more easily. So the chair drill, excuse me, where you take a chair, place it on the outside of your hip here. I'm going to bump it, right, to start. I'm just going to bump it. And then I'm going to create a gap between my hip and the chair at the top. And it's typically going to be about, a hand width, right, or 2 fingers, right? You can fit 2 fingers or a ball, right? That's about how big that gap's going to be at the top. And now if I'm in this position, since I've created that gap, that means that my momentum is now moving toward the target. It also means that I've pushed my hip back and around. And it also puts my leg at an angle that allows me to more easily push off and get to my lead side. Now I can very easily get to my lead side and be able to make ball first contact, get the hands in front, all those sorts of things. So the chair drill would be a really good one for a lot of people. I would venture to say, I don't think it would be overestimating if I said probably 50% of the people watching the office hours right now could benefit from that drill. That's how often I see it. All right, we got about 30 minutes left here. So if you got some more questions, keep them coming. In the meantime, I'll just be answering some of the Facebook posts here. If you're just jumping on here, I'm just waiting for a question to be asked. So if you got a question, feel free to ask. So Charles H says, can you demonstrate the setup for a sand shot and discuss hitting behind the ball at different distances for different results? I tend to thin out of bunkers. Yeah. So let's talk about that. So setting up in the bunker, we want to have a nice wide stance. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is it's more stable, right? Sand can be an unstable surface, so being wider can help. It also helps you to get your hands lower. So if I'm wider, it's easier to get my hands lower, right? I want to have my hands lower so that way I don't have to aim so far to the left, right? A lot of people don't realize this, but I mean, this isn't a very high lofted wedge, but if you look here, if I stand close to it, right, and I have this face open, it's going to point to the right. If I get wider and I stand farther away from it and get my hands lower, well, now look at where the clip face is pointing, right? My face is wide open, but it's actually, I have it laying and pointing up to the sky basically, but it's pointing. When I hit this ball, it's gonna go straight, right? Because my hands are lower, right? So wider helps you get your hands lower. So basically, wide, we want a wide open face, right? And this is just kind of standard. And then, generally we want to hit about 4 to 6 inches behind the ball, right? And it's going to be more of an armsy swing, right? So it's going to be more lift and hinge, right? And then kind of throw it. We almost want to feel like we're coming in like this, right? And really throwing that club into the bunker. That's what we want to feel like, right? And then we want to feel like when we finish, the club face is kind of pointing back at us, right? Now, in reality, it's going to be more like that, right? But some people may need to feel more like this, right? To make sure that we're getting into the sand. Now, we want to have the face open because, one, we want loft to get the ball to come up high out of the sand. And then two, we want to use the bounce of the club, right? So if we have the face open, we're going to be able to use this hunk of metal on the bottom of the club. You can think of this like water skiing, right? If anybody's been water skiing, if you are water skiing, you want to have the nose of the skis above the sand. The nose of the skis is basically the leading edge of the club. If that leading edge of the club or the nose of the skis gets into the water, right, then it's going to dig. We don't want it to dig. We want it to glide through the sand, right? So what I would recommend doing is mastering the bunker shot, the kind of high, soft bunker shot that it's not going to have a ton of bite to it, but you're going to be hitting 4 to 6 inches behind the ball. As you get very much more skilled, you can work, and this would be the shot that most tour players are hitting most of the time. Because there's a high risk factor that's involved with hitting closer to the ball. But the benefit of hitting closer to the ball is that you're going to get more spin. So if a tour player has a shot where they need to get a little bit more bite, they need to get it to stop very quickly, they may hit a little bit closer to the ball. But again, there's an associated risk with that. So I wouldn't really ever do that unless you just really need to, and if you're highly skilled. So yeah, I would hit 4 to 6 inches behind the ball. A really good way to train this would be just to put some balls in a line and put a line in the sand about 4 inches behind the ball, about 4 inches in front of the ball, and just practice entering and leaving the sand at those lines, right? If you're thinning it, then what could be happening is you could be hitting way too close, getting too much of the ball, or you could be hitting way too far behind. The club's coming back up out of the sand, and you're hitting the club with the leading edge. So if we practice entering the sand 4 inches behind and 4 inches in front, you're going to get the club to glide underneath the sand. So that's what I'd recommend doing. And the other big thing that I see that people don't tend to do is they don't tend to swing hard enough. There's a lot of the sand's going to provide a lot of resistance, right? So we need to swing hard to get through that resistance. So that would be what I'd recommend doing. Open the face, wide open, get it pointing up to the sky, wide stance, get those hands low, stand a little bit farther away from it, and then practice entering the sand 4 inches behind, 4 to 6 inches behind, 4 to 6 inches in front. Typically, the farther you hit behind the ball, the harder you're going to need to swing, and the less the less spin you're going to have. So the more kind of roll you're going to get. And then the closer you hit to the ball, the less hard you're going to have to swing, and the more spin you're going to get, but the more associated risk that you're going to have. So I would get good at the 4 to 6 inches behind the ball, get good at that one. And then once you start getting good at that, then you can work on, okay, what happens if I hit a little bit closer, right? Jan K says, what are your thoughts on of grounding versus hovering driver? Really personal preference. I personally like to ground the driver, and then basically right before I take the club back, I just kind of lift it up slightly and bring it back. But there are Clay likes to hover the driver. It's really personal preference. To me, hovering the driver puts more tension. For me, kind of holding that driver up to me adds more tension, and it doesn't allow me to have as free a takeaway. But whereas other people feel the opposite. Other people feel like, well, if the club's on the ground, I don't feel like I can have as free a takeaway. So I kind of do a little bit of both. Basically, what I do is I kind of bounce the club lightly on the ground, and then on one of those bounces, right, I basically just start bringing the club back. So I'm essentially at the moment that I'm bringing the club back, I'm hovering the club, but I'm not holding it there. Some players like to hold it there and then bring it back. I don't like to do that. I like to it feels like I can kind of keep it in place and stay in good balance. If I'm just kind of, basically what I'm doing is I'm just kind of bouncing it, and I'm kind of keeping my grip nice and soft. And then basically what I do is I'll start the swing on one of the bounces essentially. So it's hovering. That's what I like to do, but you have to find your own personal preference. But I personally like to ground the club. So John P says, question on the 20-minute shallowing fix instruction. Step 1 emphasizes hooking the ball, and you need to roll your hands over to do that. Does this rolling of the hands feel continue with step 2 and 3 in the shallow fix? So it will most likely continue with step 2, because step 2 is, so step 1, the only goal is just to get the ball to hook. Doesn't matter where it starts, just get the ball to hook. Step 2 is to get the ball to start to the right and hook. Right. So if you need to roll the hands over to get the ball to start to the right and hook, then keep doing that. Step 3 is dialing it in. Right. So when you dial it in to get more of a playable ball flight, you may not need to roll the hands over as much. It may be a little bit less. So most likely you'll carry it over to step 2. But step 3, you'll probably tone it down to get it more dialed in, like a baby draw. John P says it seems the rolling over the hands concept is contrary to the straight line release. Can you clarify this release? So let's just talk about what exactly the straight line release is. Straight line release is just talking about where you release the club. It's not really talking about how you're rolling your hands over or anything like that. It's just where you're releasing the club, right? So when we release the club, that's where the club's splitting the forearms. So I can have a rolled release or I can have a square release, right? So this would be hands not rolled. There, I've got it released. Hands rolled, it's released, right? So it's not really, the straight line release is not about how the hands are rolling or not rolling. It's about where the club is releasing, where it's splitting the forearms. So you can have either or. And if you look on tour, you look at pros, you're going to see some players that have more of a square release, and you're going to have some players that have more of a rolled over release. Rory has a more rolled over. Jordan Spieth has a more square release. So basically, when they're releasing the club, with Rory, his club face is going to be more like that, and with Jordan, it's going to be more pointing to the sky. Well, what I would say to that is if you're a player that struggles with getting the club face closed, you probably want to have more of a rolled release because it's going to help you to get the club face more closed. If you're a player that struggles with getting the club face too close, you may benefit from having more of a square kind of release where you're not rolling over the hands as much. I would say a majority of golfers are going to be better with a rolled release because most golfers tend to struggle with an open face. So a rolled face is going to a rolled kind of release is going to be a little bit better for you. But you can have a straight line release that's either rolled or square or anywhere in between. So John P says, I have no trouble hooking the ball. I struggle most with early extension. Some pros have a small amount of early extension. I can get it owned to 1 to 2 inches of early extension, but the last 1 to 2 inches proves difficult. Thanks. Yeah, there's a lot of pros that have a little bit of early extension. Jack Nicklaus had a little bit of early extension. Zach Johnson. Jimmy Walker. Yeah, so there's plenty of players that have, a little bit of early extension for sure. So Bruce says, I'm confused about tilt and depth in the backswing. How much should I have? A really good way to kind of get the feel for this is to just put a club across your shoulders. And when you turn back, your shoulders, if you put it on top of your shoulders should be roughly around 4 to 8 feet on the other side of the golf ball, right? So if my ball is here, right? That stick is roughly about 4 feet. It's probably maybe closer to 3.5 feet. But basically, the divot board is at least 4 feet on the other side of my ball. It's probably like 4.5 feet, right? If I were to turn this and get it pointing toward that divot board, that would be a good amount of tilt. So Louis S says, getting connected, is it at the top of the downswing or the top of the downswing or towards the bottom of the downswing? Bottom of the downswing. You want to disconnect at the top of the swing. If you're being connected at the top of the swing, you're going to reduce. You're not going to be able to. You want your arms to kind of disconnect and then reconnect your body. So in the downswing, that's when you're going to reconnect with your body. John P says, thanks for the help to know Q that some pros extend early a tiny bit. When doing the shallowing fix, it causes my hips to bow out towards the target in the downswing. Any suggestions? Yeah, shallow out the club more with the upper body and not the lower body, right? So you're basically using early extension to shallow out the club. Better players don't do that. So what we have to understand is that, early extension, if we extend the hips early, we're going to reduce the amount that we can rotate the body coming into impact. And you're going to tend to reduce the amount of shaft lean that you can get, right? Now, it's not always the same for all players, but basically, if I'm doing this, right, that shallows out the club, right? So you have to stay here, but then shallow out the club in some other way. And that has to come from the upper body. So I would do it. You could try it with your wrist angles. You could try it with rotating your forearms. You can try it with getting your elbows to point in the right direction. You can try it with some spine tilt, and you can try it with lowering the arms. Those are all the things that shallow out the club with the upper body. That's the way that we see the better players doing it, right? So, the way that you would get away from getting the legs kind of bow out and really extend is to not use that to shallow out the club and to use your upper body to shallow out the club, right? Now, you can shallow out the club that way, but the problem is that you're going to tend to kind of stand up, early release, and flip, right? Because when you early extend, it initiates your rotation, but then your rotation is going to stall. And when you stall your rotation, you're going to tend to early release the club. So getting to where you can, use the upper body, so wrists, your forearms, your shoulders, your spine, and also, lowering your arms, any of those pieces, you have to find your recipe to kind of make that happen. So that's what I would play around with. No problem, John. Glad to help. All right, it's right at noon, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. Thanks everybody for joining me. We'll be back here tomorrow, Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time.